Uh,
Okay. You'll put your sound on when you're ready to go.
okay, 40 minutes or 30? Because we need,
40.
okay.
Ava, let me know when Dean comes in, please.
Sure.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the meeting.
Dean is joining now.
Dean is joining now, which means that we can actually follow our program. We'll wait till about 1:05. We have almost 80 people in the room already. I have something on my screen here. I don't know why.
Yeah, that seems to be our email, I think.
Yeah, can we get that off? Thank you.
Hey, Ann, do you want to get started?
Dean, you're here?
I am here.
Okay, then I'm going to get started. Welcome, everybody, to our February 5th chapter meeting. I apologize for the raspiness of my voice. I had a kind of a triple hit with COVID, strep, and an almost 2-week bout of laryngitis.
Ugh.
So I'm coming out of that, and I'm hoping that I will be able to articulate as clearly as I can so that you can understand me. As you saw from the post that Bonnie had up, we're going to start with Dean Hubbard today to give us a little report on what's going on with the healthcare, and particularly with the lawsuits. And then we're very excited to have Manny Ness, an international scholar and activist, who's going to talk to us about his latest book. And Debbie Bell cannot be here today, but we're going to hear a little bit from Michael Foley from the Welfare Fund. I want to thank, in particular, Dave Cuddlechuck, who will be taking notes today for us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Associate Director, Dean Hubbard. Dean?
Thanks, Ann. Hey, everybody. Good to see you all. Just briefly, I think probably everybody in this meeting knows that last summer, Judge Lyle Frank, who's a Supreme Court judge in Manhattan, and in New York, Supreme Court is actually a trial court. It's not an appellate court. Issued an injunction preventing the city from forcing retirees into a Medicare Advantage plan through Aetna. And the city promptly appealed the judge's injunction to the appellate division, which is the appellate court of first resort in New York State. So the parties have completed their briefing to the appellate division, and the appellate division will, the next step would be, in that case, would be for them to schedule oral arguments. Although PSC is not a party to that case, we did decide to file an amicus brief, what's called an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief, as a member union of the MLC, which, as folks know, the Municipal Labor Committee. The MLC has already filed an amicus brief joining the city in opposing Judge Frank's injunction, so that we thought it was important for the PSC as a member union of the MLC to file an amicus brief stating the reasons that why we think it is important for the appellate division to uphold the judge's injunction that's preventing the city from forcing retirees into Medicare Advantage. So we filed a motion with the appellate division to be able to file our amicus brief. And last week, the court granted that motion. So we are going to be filing our amicus brief this week with the appellate division, arguing that Judge Frank properly issued the injunction. And we don't reiterate all the different reasons that the injunction was properly issued. That's really the role of the retirees, who are the plaintiffs or the petitioners in the case. We focus on really two things that we think are particularly important. One is that we believe that judge was correct, that the city administrative code requires the city to pay the entire cost of retiree healthcare, and that forcing people into Medicare Advantage violates that provision of the statute. We also feel it was important as an MLC union to counter the position of the MLC. The MLC is taking the position that that part of the city administrative code that says the city has to pay the entire cost of retiree healthcare, they're saying that interferes with collective bargaining. And we do not agree. We feel that the city council is well within its right to establish what basic minimum benefits that people should receive. It's like a minimum wage law. And there's nothing about a provision of the law that establishes a minimum threshold for what the city has to do that in any way interferes with collective bargaining. So we felt that it was important to make that point as well. And so those are basically the two arguments that we made in our amicus brief in support of the judge's injunction. We don't yet know when the appellate division will be hearing oral arguments or when they will be making their decision. But I would anticipate that it's at least a couple months away. So that's my update on the lawsuit. And I don't know if folks have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Does anybody have any questions for Dean? Dave? Dave, unmute
All
yourself.
on mute. Good. Is there a date set for the hearing itself?
Not yet, Dave. We're still waiting for the court to schedule the oral arguments, at least as far as
Okay.
I know.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Lizette Cologne?
Yes, hi, everybody. Hi, Dean.
How is that?
On January 25th, several of us got a letter from Marianne Pisitola, the people from several of us, meaning the people in the PSC safety network. And she was indicating that as of January the 25th, our union had filed this amicus brief, but it had two mistakes. And at that point, James was supposed, well, we were expecting that what James Davis was mentioning, our president, that it was going to be corrected. It would take place as of now. And they still have not corrected the mistakes. Could you kindly let us know when is that happening? Because you mentioned that this week you're going to file something. Is that the revision of the amicus brief? Marianne was mentioning that the response, the amicus brief is supposed to be in support of the retirees. And you just said that that is the role of the retirees. And we know that, unfortunately. But we were hoping that an amicus brief will be in support of the retirees. And what Marianne is saying is that there are two parts of the amicus brief that are in detriment of the retirees. And we were asking James, and he indicated that they were going to correct that, the respondent versus the appellant, which was a crash one, and then also the MOC as representing us. So kindly clarify that for us. And if that hasn't taken place, will it be taking place? Thank you.
Thanks, Lizette. Yes, so what we filed earlier that Marianne was responding to was a motion to the court to be permitted to file an amicus brief. And as part of that motion, we had to file as an exhibit the brief that we wanted to file. So that was what Marianne was looking at. And the court hadn't yet ruled on whether or not we could file the brief. And last week, the court ruled that we can file the brief, so that we are going to do that this week. The mistake that you're referring to and that James was referring to was on the title of the brief. And there's a typo in it, and it says the brief is in support of the appellants, and it should say in support of the plaintiff's respondents. And so that typo is going to be corrected. Marianne also disagrees with us on some of the substantive points of the brief. For example, the retirees are taking the position in the litigation that the Municipal Labor Committee doesn't have any authority to negotiate retiree health care. We don't agree with that. That's based on the idea that, in part, based on the idea that retirees are not members of their unions. And of course, in the case of the PSC, retirees are members of the union. and as a member of the MLC, there are certain aspects of retiree healthcare that the MLC does negotiate with the city. And we feel that it would be a mistake to have a decision, a legal decision that says retirees don't have any kind of union representation in dealing with the city. We don't agree with them on that point. So, but we do agree with them that Judge Frank correctly decided the law, and particularly in finding that the city administrative code requires the city to pay the entire cost of retiree health care. And for that reason, it was unlawful for the city to try to force retirees into Medicare Advantage, which is the big picture, the most important thing that we all agree on, and why we are supporting that injunction staying in place.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Irving Markowitz? Can you unmute yourself, Irving?
I did read the amicus brief, and I found it surprisingly uninformative. I did not see where it went in any way beyond the brief that had been filed previously by Miriam Pizzatola. And to the extent that today you have made comments indicating how the PSC differs with that original brief, I think it would be most helpful for us if we could have seen that somehow in writing. I think Marianne Pizzatola has really made an outstanding contribution to our welfare. It's my impression that if it hadn't been for her and her organization, we would today be in Medicare Advantage, no question about it. And I would really like to see her accomplishment and her aid to us acknowledged in some way.
Thank you, Irving.
Thanks, Irving. The only thing is just to correct one thing, that the retirees brief was not filed prior to our amicus brief. It was filed afterwards.
Yeah, no, I know.
Lorraine Cohen?
Hi.
Hi.
When you say you think it's in the interest of the PSC and maybe other workers that the MLC be considered a bargaining agent when it comes to healthcare, I just wanted to know if that was based on past practice, or is it written into city and state law?
Okay, Lorraine. Well, what I said was that we don't think it's in the interest of retirees not to have any union representation in dealing with the city. And that, we believe, would be the logical outcome of a position that the MLC lacks the authority to negotiate with the city over retiree healthcare. It's a somewhat complex issue, but there is actually a case of the Court of Appeals, which interestingly is cited in the retirees brief, that does indicate that unions have the authority through collective bargaining to negotiate the terms of healthcare for people who are members of a bargaining unit when they are retired. And in fact, the practice has been that the PSC for many, many decades has as part of the MLC, negotiated healthcare for both active and retired workers with the city through the MLC. And we have very, very serious concerns with the way the MLC has handled its business. And at the same time, we feel it would be irresponsible on our part to call for ending the current system without having an alternative in place. We think that we feel that that would be dangerous and not good for retirees or active workers. So we're not and didn't take the position that the MLC is doing a good job, that it's a good organization, that it's a wonderful union. We simply don't support the idea of throwing out the idea that retirees can have union representation in dealing with the city. We don't think that that's a smart thing to do.
Lorraine, did you want to follow up? You can't unmute yourself. Let me go to Michael Frank.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay, Lorraine.
Okay. With all due respect, I do not think you answered my question. I understand the argument that you think that healthcare should be bargained, but retiree healthcare with union representation. But I am still asking whether or not that is part of the law, the bargaining of healthcare for retirees. And
yeah, Lorraine, I did answer that question.
you
I
did
said it's
not.
a complex legal question and that there is a case that is cited in the retirees brief. It is a case by the New York State Court of Appeals that says that unions can negotiate health benefits for people who are formerly part of the bargaining unit who are now retired.
Okay, but
So
what about the
that's my answer.
MLC? What
That's
about
why
the MLC?
there is no law specifically on the question of the MLC's ability to bargain. There's a very complex history, and there is a history, and again, in which I answered your question by saying that the PSC for decades has, as part of the MLC, negotiated retiree and active employee healthcare through the MLC with the city.
There is a difference between past practice, which I'm not arguing with at this point, because I think there needs to be a discussion of that, and the law. And I was interested in finding out what the legal status was of the MLC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Dean. Michael Frank.
I'm coming in late, so Dean, this question may have already been asked. So just let me know if that's the case. The question is about the education of our membership about the changes in healthcare that are in the offing for in-service people. My understand, has that been discussed or asked?
No, not yet, Michael.
Okay, so my question is, I understand that you are going out to, or have plans to go out to various chapters to brief or educate the chapters on what is happening for in-service people. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there's definitely more to it than that. I don't know
Okay.
if folks saw last month's Clarion, but there was an article in last month's Clarion that talks about the changes that the city and the MLC are discussing regarding the healthcare for in-service workers. And so the healthcare working group, that is an expanded version of the group that's been working on the Medicare Advantage issue, is now putting together a strategy for us to be able to address and respond to the changes that the city and the MLC are thinking about with respect to active employee healthcare. And part of that will be engagement and education of members in the chapters and through pre-DA meetings and articles in the Clarion and lots of other kinds of outreach and opportunities to engage and take action.
Thank you. May I, can chapters who are interested in having you come out and speak, and someone already asked me that, contact you?
It's going to be more than me. There'll be several folks who will be part of going out and speaking to folks in chapters. One of them is Carl Kronebusch, who's a faculty member at Baruch. So there will be several different people who are going out to chapters, and we're going to try to hit every chapter.
Okay. What's the time frame for that, Dean?
We have a meeting of the group, the working group, this week, and that's one of the things that we'll talk about.
Okay, I'm going to
Thank
call up
you.
3 more people, Ava, Erwin, and Gloria Paulus. And then I'd like us to move on to the rest of our program. We have a very important speaker waiting. Ava Farkas.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight a question being asked in the chat about whether retirees are voting members of the PSC, and if so, how do they get their ballots? I just wanted one of the chapter leaders to address that so everybody's on the same page about your rights and your standing as, full members of the PSC.
Okay, Erwin Yelowitz, please.
Oh no, could someone answer that? Like
Oh.
Bonnie or Anne or Diane answer about how as a chapter you guys vote for
We
within
vote by
PSC
ballot.
elections?
We get ballots.
I should say that the elections we vote in are for the union leadership, that is the president, vice president, executive council, and also for the retiree leadership of our chapter. And those elections each happen every 3 years. So if somebody is recently retired, perhaps they have not yet had an opportunity to vote in those elections. But if you've been retired longer than that and you've never received a ballot, please contact membership department.
And we have representation as well on the we have 2 representatives from the retirees chapter on the executive council, which Eileen put in the chat. And I believe we even have people on the bargaining team, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we do have people on the bargaining team.
Yeah, we don't vote to accept or reject the contract, but we do vote for a percentage of the representation for the executive council.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Bonnie. Erwin Yelowitz, and then Gloria Paulus. Erwin.
Okay. On that question that was just asked, we also have delegates in the delegate assembly. So we are fully represented in the PSC to a degree that I think most other unions do not have. And that's been an issue with the MLC. But my question for Dean is on this issue of past practice that was brought up. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me from what I know of labor negotiations that past practice plays a very important role in decision-making about union actions and bargaining and so on, that it is not an unimportant fact that we have had the MLC bargaining for us for better or worse since the 1980s, I believe, and continuously in that regard. So that it would be I think it would be very counterproductive to simply dismiss past practice and say that because there is no law requiring that, although it has been going on for 40 years, it is not a legitimate function of the MLC.
Thank you,
Your
Erwin.
opinion on that, Dean?
Yeah, I think that's a point well taken, Erwin. Thank you.
Gloria Paulus, nice to see your face. I just wrote to you. Gloria.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll be real quick, Dean. You mentioned the active employees' health insurance, but I didn't hear you mention those of us under 65. I just turned 62. Are we included? Where do we fall?
Yeah, Medicare only applies to folks who are 65 and over. So for folks who are retired but are under 65, you are still covered by the CBP, the
Right.
Comprehensive Benefit Plan.
Only if full time, only if you retire from a full title, a
Right.
full-time title.
So
Only if you retired with health insurance, right?
Yeah. So my question is, whatever applies to the actives would apply to us? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Correct.
yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Dean. We're going to move to the next part of our program again. I hope my voice holds up. Manny is a very accomplished scholar and activist. Let me introduce our main speaker today, who is Emmanuel Ness, a professor of political science at Brooklyn College and a visiting professor of sociology at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. A trade union organizer in the US and labor activist in poor countries of the global South, Emmanuel Ness, known as Manny, is editor-in-chief of the Journal of Labor and Society, a ranked peer-reviewed quarterly review. Over the past 20 years, Manny has served as a delegate and department representative and has served on several committees. For nearly 10 of those years, Manny has chaired the International Committee of the PSC CUNY. He's also chair of the New York Peace Council, an affiliate of the U.S. Peace Council and World Peace Council. He has actively supported the Move the Money campaign to shift federal military spending to education and social needs. He recently returned from the U.S. Peace Council delegation to meet with the Chinese People's Association for Peace and Disarmament. His many books, academic articles, chapters, edited volumes, and handbooks focus on labor movements, international migration, social movements, and Western imperialism. Some of his books and edited works include, and this is quite an impressive recent list, Global Rupture, Neoliberal Capitalism and the Rise of Informal Labor in the Global South. The Rutledge Handbook of the Gig Economy, 2023, the Oxford Handbook of Economic Imperialism, 2022, Organizing Insurgency, Workers' Movements in the Global South, 2021, the Oxford Handbook of Migration Crisis, 2019, Choke Points, Logistics Workers Disrupting the Global Chain, 2019, Southern Insurgency, the Coming of the Global Working Class, 2016, and the acclaimed Palgrave Encyclopedia of Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism, 2014, and republished in 2021. Finally, the Encyclopedia of Global Human Migration and many articles and academic journals. His latest book, the subject of today's presentation, is Migration as Economic Imperialism, Polity 2023, which focuses on Western financial imperialism and the impression of the global South. The subtitle of the book is Migration as Economic Imperialism, How International Labor Mobility Undermines Economic Development in Poor Countries. The book demonstrates that migrant workers are necessary for rich countries, yet they are under threat by the rise of populism and xenophobia. It is based on 10 years of research in origin states and destination countries, including Nepal, Moldova, Vietnam, Malawi, El Salvador, and Western Europe, North American and key destinations in the global south, the Arab Gulf states, Malaysia, Thailand, Korea, and Japan. And Manny brings a labor perspective to all of his research. The talk will discuss the recent migration wave in New York and the US budget cuts, regrowth and growth, and the rise of intolerance. So I give you, it's our pleasure to have Manny as a member of our union and as a future retiree. Manny Ness.
Thank you, Anne, for that unwarranted introduction, but I appreciate it. I think I'm going to start with a set of slides that I think will help us understand some of the points that I'm making in the book, but also allow us to kind of have a discussion afterward, because my perspective is based on the work that I've done, and of course there are other viewpoints on this subject which I'd like to hear. And so perhaps I'll start with a set of slides, and then we'll see how far we go. Okay, thank you. Can everybody see this set of slides?
Not yet.
Oh, do I need, I think I need the right to share screen.
You should have the
You
right to
should-
share
Oh,
screen.
Yeah, you're a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now I'll share screen.
There you go.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, the title of this presentation is Migration as Economic Imperialism. And I was motivated by literature that has emerged across the social sciences, and in fact, even the humanities and beyond, that migration is a beneficial vehicle for countries that are poor. And that what I'm trying to do in this book is to debunk the argument that migrants actually send money back to their countries that contribute to economic development there. And this is the latest, actually, perspective amongst global development organizations, the United Nations even, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the International Organization for Migration, and beyond. But while I give this presentation, I think it's important to recognize that there are other issues that may be on your mind that I will try to respond to. So once again, thank you for inviting me, and I'll just give you my first slide. Migration data 2022. See if I can get the, yeah. There are approximately 200.
Do you want to hit play so it does full screen at
Oh,
the
is that
top
what
of
I
your
have to do?
bar? I think hit play. Yeah.
Where would that be?
At the top,
Yeah.
you just,
There you
yeah.
go.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you. That's very helpful. We can see that international migrants represent a very large proportion of the population in the world, far larger than people might actually think. The migration literature, including the most recent work by Heinz de Haan, person that is a leading migration scholar, argues that migration has not really expanded significantly. In contrast, I actually argue that it has. For instance, migration has gone from about 2.5% in 2020 to, forgive me, in 2000, 2.5% to 3.6%. Now, in percentages, that doesn't really seem like a lot of people, but in reality, it actually is. I also want to point out that I come from a perspective that is one that supports migration and the right for people to have mobility throughout the world. And world remittances have grown too. The data that I have is based on data that was collected during the COVID-19 crisis by the World Bank and the United Nations Development Project and so forth. And by now, remittances have become the main source of economic development, which I don't think exists, in poor countries. Amongst those 281 million migrants, 200 million are temporary workers, and therefore some migrants are not just working, and others, just go places, and others are temporary migrants. So what do I mean by a temporary migrant? I think it subsumes both the official temporary migrant programs that exist throughout the world on bilateral agreements between states, as well as undocumented workers who traverse borders without authorization. And I think it's important to recognize this because if you look at the sheer number, 200 million, and you look at the population of the planet coming close to 8 billion people, if the average family is 4 or 5 people in the world, this represents an effect on really 1 out of every 8 to 10 people. So families are affected significantly by migration, and in specific countries, they're significant. They have even greater levels of significance. And so some of the data I've found and worked on and collected and analyzed shows that a very large share of the remittances go to high-income countries. They don't only come from high-income countries, but they go to high-income countries. So, for instance, there's perhaps German workers going to the United States or Japan, or you might have French workers going to Canada, and so forth and so on. But the vast majority of workers themselves are actually low-income workers who are employed in 5 key areas. That includes agriculture, construction, manufacturing, gig work, and I think most importantly, to a great degree, care work, particularly amongst women. So you can see the amount of money is in accordance with what I'm just pointing out. And here is data on remittances received, and this kind of points out the degree to which high-income countries receive a substantial share of remittances, and lower middle-income countries, by and large, take up also the largest share. But if you combine the low-income countries and the lower middle-income countries, their numbers are significant, but are in some respects very important to these countries to a large extent, and therefore I'm pointing out that remittances are important in the sense that they are the main source of revenue that countries receive. Here's the top remittances countries in the year 2020. It largely hasn't changed, and you can see that these are receiving countries, that India, China, Mexico, Philippines, Egypt, and so forth and so on are there, as well as France and Germany and beyond. And then we see the 10 top remittances receiving countries in 2020 as a percentage of GDP. And they tend to be small countries, specifically island countries, but some of them are not so small. For instance, Nepal has a population of about 40 million people, El Salvador, Honduras. What's not on this list, Guatemala represent 25 to 30 million people together and so forth. But in general, poor countries are the recipients of remittances. And here in this table, I just want to make it as clear as possible. I'm looking at purchasing power parity on a world basis based on the World Inequality Report in 22. Purchasing power parity means that the degree to which dollars or money can be exchanged in different ways. So it means that, for instance, it's the cost of living for an American may be much cheaper in Vietnam, yet at the same time, Vietnamese people have a very difficult time surviving in many respects, especially poor people in Vietnam. So we can see that there is I think this is an incredible table because it shows the high degree of inequality on a global basis. This is not on the basis of within countries, but between countries. So if we look at income purchasing power parity, the top 40% has 39%, forgive me, the middle 40% has 39% income purchasing power parity, whereas the top 1% has 19% and 38% of the global wealth. And if you look at the data, if you go to 1/10 of 1%, the numbers are even more skewed in favor of the very rich billionaires and so forth, multi-billionaires. So, and here again, I'm demonstrating that there is a growth in migration and that there is a large proportion of workers who are international migrants who are female workers. About equal amount of women are working and internationally as workers across the 5 areas that I spoke of, except perhaps the gig economy, although even in the gig economy to some degree, now that I think about it. The UAE is the largest proportion, has the largest proportion of migrants. I'm sure many of you know this. There's about a population of citizens of 2 million, but the country has a population of 13 million. So, about 11 million people are actually working and engaged in mainly low-wage activities like construction and caregiving and so forth. So anyway, then this is another data set that shows that there's 164 million people in the year 2020. Those numbers have gone up, and 689 billion remittances. Now, there are 3 major corridors of migration in the world, and I'm sure we'll be discussing the one in North America. The most contentious, in my view, although Europe is too. With respect to North America, the United States is the major destination state and the center of really the world economy and so forth. And the migration regime is one in which there isn't any really migration regime. In this way, I'm really saying that the United States does not really have a policy since 1986 for admitting people to the country, with the exception of certain temporary migrants. So people who pick veg fruit and so forth, as well as very highly skilled migrant workers from India who are privileged. And Europe has a very interesting form of migration, but it's changed dramatically over the last 20 years. Historically, after the Second World War, most migrants came from North Africa, as well as the Middle East, and they worked in construction, agriculture, etc. Now, Europe, for the most part, has what is called the Schengen zone, which came into existence about 21 years ago. And the Schengen zone implies that well, it doesn't imply, it allows people to move to any part of the region. You can name the countries. It goes all the way to even Moldova. And even Ukrainians become part of that zone, even though they're not officially part of the Schengen zone. But of course, people from the UK are no longer part of the European Union, and they've also withdrawn, I believe, from the Schengen zone as well. So what has happened is that, so for instance, you might have workers in Luxembourg traveling to, let's say, France or Switzerland or someplace like that. And so there's a very little, travel, and they're considered international migrants because they cross borders. Or you have Polish workers employed in France, and so forth and so on. So with few exceptions, Europeans are the major migrants within Europe. And there's a tendency for low-wage countries to be the origin states of migrants, and rich countries of Western Europe to be the destination states. Western Europe is one of the most, even though things have changed, the most egalitarian regions of the world because it's so wealthy and so forth, and they have far more a bigger social safety net than the United States does. But I would add this caveat that's very important, and that is that for the last 20 years as well, African, North African, and Africans south of the Sahara have sought to migrate to Europe and have been interdicted by what is called Frontex, an arm of the European Union, which stops ships from traveling to Europe. And in many instances, as we'll see, you have capsized boats, you have, even last year, I think in November, December, there were about 800 to 900 people that died on their way to Italy, and another case with respect to Greece thereafter. And we'll talk about the 2015 wave of migration. Unfortunately, migration uses water terms. I don't understand why, but water, wave, and so forth. So streams of migration, waters migration. In any case, people from North Africa and Africa south of the Sahara, as well as Southwest Asia or the Middle East, have been prevented to travel to Europe for the most part. And this, we'll get into this examination because it's very much related to the United States and North America, that nonetheless, there have been migrants who have traversed those boundaries. Just going to see how much time I have. And those migrants have come from these regions, North Africa, Africa south of the Sahara, as well as the Middle East. Asia is one of the most interesting areas of migration, in which case there are specific areas that people go, and it is a region in which you have the highest level of temporary migrants. But I make the case that in many instances, temporary migrants become undocumented by virtue of leaving their jobs voluntarily, because you have to have a broker and so forth in order to get a job that is given to you in another country. So workers in Indonesia who are domestic workers in Malaysia will have to work for one family or something like that. Or if they move to the Arab Gulf states or the Gulf Cooperation Council, in many cases, they are really working under conditions of enslavement because they're unable to leave under the kafala system. I don't use that word lightly because that's what people call themselves. So we're looking at the biggest area in terms of population in the world by far. So I think in this region, there's about 4 to 5 billion people. So let's take a look at some of the pictures. I don't use the term crisis, although it's used in the New York Times, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, etc., Daily News, Post, wherever you read, in academic or non-academic, the term crisis is used as if it were a problem for people who are in destination states. Of course, we'll have that discussion afterward with respect to New York City and the United States. But this, in 2015, there was a large group, I could say about 1 million people migrated to Europe. And that, pardon me, I don't have a cold, I just, all right. And in any case, here is an example of Budapest, Hungary in 2015, where you have a large number of migrants who had used Hungary as a transit state. And even in the case of being a transit state, which means that people are going to Hungary as a means to going to a country like Germany or Sweden, etc., they're treated very badly and so forth. And if you look at the border walls of Hungary, they're equivalent to the border walls of the United States. I was in Hungary in 2016, and the degree to which people spoke of migrants was incredible in a very derogatory way. And of course, people are Asian and Hungarians are obviously, well, they're European, but there are differences in the way certain transit states had treated migrants. So, well, I say whose crisis? It's really the crisis of the migrants themselves who are engaged in huge levels of risk to traverse boundaries, and also uncertainty and lack of the basic needs of life. Here's another example of a bilateral relationship between, in this case, Ghana, a country in West Africa, which is, it's a poor country. I think they were just under a significant amount of financial strain as a result of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank imposing severe restrictions on it. Well, you can see that they send nurses to Ghana, to Britain, and that of the 9,000 nurses that are in Ghana today, well, that come from Ghana, 6,000 work abroad. And one could actually replicate this for the Philippines and many other countries. So for instance, why is this a problem? Is that, in fact, the industry itself is education, training, and so forth, people in fairly high-skilled jobs for work overseas, because remember, I spoke of purchasing power parity, et cetera, that Ghanaian nurses can receive far more money in Britain or other parts of the world than they can in Ghana. And that's even more so the case with respect to the Philippines, where I visited and found that there's a huge industry of nurses that are produced almost by the state for export. There's a book called Migrants for Export by Robin Rodriguez that I recommend. I can go on, but I want to go quickly. And here's one of the contradictions, that migrant workers are essential to global supply chains, which are, the production of commodities that end up in Western Europe and North America, as well as other rich states. And yet they are generally treated very badly. So in this case, we see that many human rights organizations or civil society organizations had filed complaints against Malaysia for its mistreatment of workers. If you take a look at most of the slides of Malaysia, most of them are working in rubber glove factories during the COVID era. But in actuality, the largest percentage of migrants are working in electronics and semiconductors. And the majority of the workforce, this is what is so stunning, the majority of all workers in Malaysia, a country of about 28 million people, are foreigners who are on temporary migration contracts. In this case, these migrant workers were mistreated and even the United States State Department filed a case of sanctions against Malaysia in the context of the way they treated workers in these essential industries that save lives, like rubber gloves. So this is internal. Here's a picture I took in Malaysia where, for instance, it demonstrates that migrant workers can go to Malaysia as temporary workers, but they will end up in many instances as undocumented and arrested, detained, and deported. When I was taking photos of migrant workers at the airport there. And so what happens is that many employers who actually don't have any work left for the worker, maybe it's in electronics or rubber gloves, may share that worker with another employer. So in fact, the vast majority of those people deported leave because they are working for a second company or employer, and therefore they are deemed undocumented, and therefore they're deported. So I just want to show you some of the dynamics of migration that, in fact, are not just a US phenomenon, but a global phenomenon. Malaysia is one of the middle-income countries that is, for the most part, fairly poor, but growing in terms of GDP per capita. And of course, many of you know that there was a World Cup in Qatar last winter. And the Guardian reported, I actually wrote an article in an Indian newspaper, Indian journal, about the number of migrant workers from India who died on a daily basis. I think it was like 59 per day or something like that. No, that couldn't be 59 per week. So between 2011 and 2020, 6,500 migrant workers actually died in Qatar, which is another one of those small countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council that is highly wealthy and was able to host the World Cup last year. Here is another case in which is very significant when I refer to wage slavery. Here are domestic workers who are protesting the kafala system, which is a system which binds workers, chiefly women migrant workers, to their employers. And they are subject to high levels of exploitation, as I point out here, and passports are confiscated, and they are working under long-term contracts that they cannot get out of. I actually have witnessed a number of cases, especially amongst women who wanted to return home. And in fact, there's a long history of women traveling abroad that goes back to the early 20th century when people from Slovenia went to Egypt, which was at that time Alexandria, fairly affluent. And when they came home, they were treated as if they didn't belong anywhere. So they really had nowhere to go. And that process continues till this day. And I can give multiple examples if you want. Here is a case that I think really is striking because India is it's the largest country in the world in population now. Last April, it superseded officially China. Here is a neighborhood in one of their three large cities, Delhi, the capital of India, where steel is made. It's made in about 2,000 to 3,000 different locations in this neighborhood. And so you have I don't know if my pointer works here, but you can see that boy who is using the bicycle, and it's loaded with steel. And that boy is probably around 12 to 14 years old. And he's essentially working 18-hour shifts every day. I interviewed a number of these workers who had been injured severely, especially in the cold rolling steel installations where, when you're doing cold rolling steeling, steel can just exit and go into people's bodies and kill people. So many people die in this case. But I should, add a caveat here that most of the workers are not from Delhi. They come from far away places in India, like West Bengal, Bihar, and so forth and so on. And I point out that many of the deaths that take place, 1 or 2 a day at least, that's reported, are covered up by the police. And if a case is filed, the family lives so far away, they can't even really certainly recover the person, nor can they really get much compensation. We're talking about benefits, the death benefit for a person who dies, who's probably around 20 years old on average, is about $200, which a family will receive and accept as a result of being one of their family members who's killed. And here we go to North America during the COVID era. And during the COVID era, there was a tremendous wave of, again, I'm using the water word, wave of deportations that took place throughout the world. It happened in each of those 3 regions, North America, Europe, and Asia continents. And many had to leave the country and were not paid. And here's just an example of the U.S. Border Patrol in Rio Grande in 2021, where workers are being sent across the border into Mexico. Yet at the same time, there's also high-wage workers. They're called highly skilled workers who are in the STEM industries, science, technology, engineering, and beyond, and they are highly sought after workers, and they make wages that are fairly high compared to those workers who are low-wage workers. So I wanted to point out that there is a category of migrant workers who make a lot of money, and it's a complex issue, but for the most part, I would argue that they don't benefit countries. Before I pointed out the case of nurses, here's an IT worker from India in Silicon Valley. And yeah, here's an example. I did some work in Malawi as well as South Africa. And here was a real extreme case. You'll note all the people here are men. And I insisted on separating the women from the men because the stories that the women would say were harrowing in the outskirts of Johannesburg in a settlement called Thembelihle. And the workers are deported on a regular basis. The police arrest them, and in many instances, they take bribes to be released and so forth. So it is increasingly becoming a deportation regime. Zimbabwean workers, Mozambican, Malawian, etc., are deported on a regular basis. And working on a paper on that. So I refer to this as migration regimes, bilateral agreements between sending and receiving countries to facilitate temporary migration, which we have many examples of. The United States does not really have too many examples of it, except for workers in the fruit agricultural industry, picking apples or working at casinos or something like that, or people who are highly skilled. But the numbers are very, very small compared to the actual number of migrants in this country, which is about 11 million undocumented workers. So we're talking about workers who come and go. So they come to the United States on a seasonal basis. And that's the second category, where in the United States, undocumented workers account for 90% of all migrant workers. And then increasingly, there are temporary labor migration forms that facilitate improved policies, but frequently lead to undocumentation, as I pointed out. What is needed is some kind of global agreement on this, which actually was passed almost unanimously by countries of the world. It's called the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. It was passed by the United Nations, and immediately thereafter, the United States under Donald Trump, who was president at the time, opposed it, followed by Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Israel. Now, a larger number of countries have followed suit because they don't want migrants coming to their country. At the same time, many of these countries have migrants and need them because they need workers in low-wage jobs, and the United States is one of those cases. Even Poland was a recipient, many of these countries were recipients of migrants from Western Ukraine and some of the other countries. I'm arguing that there's a rise, I'm not arguing, there is a rise of right-wing populism that took place circa, well, the last 15 years or so. And here are some examples of protesters in the first instance from Ukraine who are neo-Nazis in Kiev marching for deportation of migrants. And then in the lower segment of this lower photo, we see German protesters who are saying that migrants should be supported and so forth. But there, we can't deny the fact, and I can have many more slides, that there is a growing level of right-wing populism that is in Europe and North America and even other countries of the world that is inflecting the global economy and leading to a high level of intolerance toward migrants. Here's an example of Donald Trump near the wall. Like I said, the United States is not the only country with a border wall. In Europe, you have many. And here is Marine Le Pen, who may be the future president of France, who is mobilizing on the basis of anti-immigrant sentiment or xenophobia in France. And I use the term working class. I care about labor and so forth. My research is on labor, but the decline of unions and the weakening of the union movement has contributed to the capacity of right-wing populists to mobilize their sentiment. People like Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen are just two examples, but they're universal. And then, of course, there are people like ourselves, I think, for the most part, who oppose these restrictions and the inhumane treatment of human beings who migrate across borders. This is a case of Frontex, which I mentioned earlier, where Europeans are actually saying that there should not be militarization of borders and there should be human rights and surveillance should be stopped. This is the book, and I think it's, so if you're interested, you can talk to me. I think it's getting a pretty good, very good reviews. So I'm going to stop the share screen. And how do I stop that? Let me see how I can stop the share.
Should see like a red square maybe in your toolbar.
Yeah, I see the red square, but for some reason I can't see the cursor, which is unfortunate. So,
Okay, I think I can do it.
oh, maybe I could, yeah, could you do it? Oh, that was my time limit. Yeah, I can't get my cursor to work on this, so let me see if I could escape and do something. Oh, there you go. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Ava, is that your name? Thank you very
Yeah.
much for doing it. I appreciate it. I tried to move the cursor. I know to do it. So I see that I could go on and discuss the book in greater detail. Basically, the book is a examination of how migration does not contribute to development and how it is based on a global process of unequal exchange. I use the work of Arguri Emanuel and other third world scholars that are increasingly popular amongst academics nowadays. I can go into another 40-minute lecture, but I'll stop here and I'll take questions. So I see, shall I call on the people or Peter, do you want to go?
And I think you're trying to talk. You're muted.
Mute. Yes, thank you, Manny, for a very enlightening talk, and I'm sure that you could continue on and on. Let's start the conversation, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss. Let's start with Peter Rainis. Hi, Peter.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Manny, I appreciate a lot of the data you brought forth, but I haven't heard you speak about the theme of your book, which is that migration is created by imperialism. I'm just going to forward a counter position in that it isn't imperialism, it's modernity. Today, we have so much information. Even children from the poorer countries and the middle-level countries have access to certain social media. The ability of people to see where there is economic development, where there are jobs, is developing tremendously. So I would argue if anything, it's capital development, it's the market. It isn't really imperialism. I don't think. It's post-industrial modernity that everybody wants to move between middle-level countries to poor and middle level, from middle level to high level, from high level to other high-level countries. There's a constant movement that I don't see where you're saying it's directly connected to imperialism. Yes, the different people are exploited wherever they go. Bolivians are exploited in Argentina. Argentina is not an imperialist country. South Sahara countries go to South Africa, and they're not. South Africa is not an imperialist country. So I'm just wondering whether it's not modernization, modernity, post-industrial modernity that keeps this horizontal movement continuing. It isn't just the US, Western Europe, that you would consider imperialist countries. It's a kind of intra-national movement. So I wonder what you would say about that, whether it is what I'm saying, just a question of modernity, or whether you feel it's directly impacted by imperialism.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that question or comment. But at the end, you had a question. The book is on economic imperialism, the utilization of finance, capital, and so forth to develop rich countries at the expense of poor countries. So, for instance, you saw that photo of Ghanaian nurses that were lined up going to Britain. And you can, replicate that thousands of times around the world. I see that as a form of imperialism. But in this context, Peter, I'm actually saying that those people that are left behind are the worst off because the country itself loses its most brightest and most skilled and highly trained people to countries in the core, as well as other very rich countries, as I pointed out. And I can go on in discussing this, but so there are basically three regions of migration, and I have to be honest with you, this may strike you as not odd, actually, that of those three regions, and that's why I refer to Western, but we can talk about it. Eastern Asia does not have that much xenophobia whatsoever. It just happens to be, including Japan. There's not much opposition to migration, even though there is some. It's a very interesting phenomenon. But what I'm trying to say is that for the most part, if you take a look at a country like Malawi, yes, South Africa is a sub-imperial power to some degree, and it does exploit migrants. And there is it's a relatively wealthy country with the highest level of income inequality in the world. And that was the example that I would give, but I wouldn't say that South Africa is the most significant country. But they don't certainly, migrants don't certainly bring back anything, and many of them come home desperately. For instance, that case of women migrants who are in the care industries, protesting to return to their home countries. I mean, that really gives voice to some of the instances that I saw around the world, and also some of the data that I've looked at. In many parts of the world, people want to go home and not work for other people's children, but actually help their own children. I can go on. And if you want to read the book and comment on it, I'd be happy to discuss it with you, Peter.
Okay, Lorraine?
Okay. This sounds like a completely hopeless and contradictory situation. On the one hand, people are following the market, as Peter has implied. If they can get paid better in other countries, they're going to go. And you're saying that impairs the economic development of the home countries that they are in. So, if they stayed, would economic development really be much bigger than it is? Because isn't economic development contingent on government policies? I mean, why doesn't the government stop them from going? Or International Monetary Fund policies, as you said. So would development really be very different? And we know that even though development suffers from an individual level, these remittances help poor families or other family members survive. So, they're looking at it from a very personal point of view rather than a development perspective.
Oh, thank you. I much appreciate your comments, Lorraine, because I think they're apropos. So, for instance, with respect to the main point of your question is that there is a long history. My response is that there's a long history of policies to develop countries, and each of them have failed. So we could go to foreign aid, overseas development assistance. We can examine financial incentives of various forms, direct foreign investment, and the development of specific enterprise zones for development. And in each of those cases, they haven't worked. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all, Lorraine. I'm just saying that this is probably one of the worst examples. It's really sort of outrageous to say that by taking migrants out of their country and work in low-wage jobs overseas. I mean, we could talk about the United States and New York if you want later on, if we have time. That I don't. You're right. You're absolutely right. That it will definitely help families. So if you look at a country like El Salvador, it may allow a family, if remittances are sent home, to send their child to school, or to buy clothing, or to buy TV sets. Nothing really more than that. And what it has done is that it's destroyed the internal economy of El Salvador for tradable goods, so that the ruling classes of these countries are actually preying on that money and using it to sell all these products to migrant workers. It creates a lot of divisions. If you think of a country like Moldova, about half the population is overseas, abroad, and they are, you have a lot of family problems with respect to the cohesion of families, staying together, a lot of questions about that. I'm not an expert in social work and so forth, but I do think that children need and adults and we all need care in one way or another. And if it's not provided by family members, especially in poor countries, who will provide it? I mean, I can give numerous examples, but you're absolutely right. There is a point of survival. In most instances, those people who go to the United States from El Salvador will never come back because they're undocumented and they're making higher wages. And after a period of time, I think we all know this, the sense of emotional attachment dissolves. It doesn't get stronger. And that's what's happening in El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua, well, Nicaragua too, and Guatemala. So yeah, I agree with you in a perfect world, but we don't live in a perfect world in that in most instances, people, especially in the United States case and Central America and Latin America, increasingly Venezuela today, they're not going to go back to their home countries. And that, that's good for the United States to a great degree, but it's not good to, which is, I think, a very potentially contentious point, but it's not good for Venezuelans whatsoever.
Lydia Gerson.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I've had many discussions with people about the immigration into the city lately. And of course, they bring up the issue that we are walking over bodies in the streets here that we're not taking care of. But for me, the issue always is how much we're responsible for this, interfering in countries, certainly in Central and North America, that make people leave. This is what you actually are talking about. We create this, and the IMF is part of it as well. You didn't have as much time to go into that, but people don't generally want to leave their countries. They're generally forced. And even people I respect, saying things like, oh, they're going to come up here, they're going to get Social Security. They just don't get it, that we're responsible for this and that we don't deal with that. Anyway, I just had to say that. Thank you.
Lydia, I can't agree with you more, Lydia. I would even go further. There's the point of sanctions. So why are Venezuelans leaving? And a small proportion are coming to the United States. We think of it as a quote unquote crisis, but it's a crisis for them, not really. I mean, it's budgetary questions for New York City and so forth and other cities in the United States. But they're leaving because they can't survive. The country has been placed under severe sanctions. Whatever you think about the leadership of Venezuela, positive, negative, doesn't really matter. Those sanctions have really hurt. And in many instances, Peter, you know this very well, there are secondary sanctions which prevent any country from trading with countries such as Cuba. So that blockade has been really damaging to that country, to Cuba and many other countries around the world. I actually think, and I know Renata has written on this, I think there will be a blowback, and it's already taking place, that there is increasingly notwithstanding this migration, a cohesion that's forming in the global South. By that I mean is that, relatively speaking, there's a growing level of technology in the South that is making labor more productive. And so, in the years to come, we're going to see what might happen as a consequence of this productivity and technology that is in the South that may equalize the situation. So just pointing that out. I agree completely with you, Lydia.
Joan Greenbaum.
Thanks, Manny. Really great research. I wanted to follow up on Lydia's excellent point. If we just look at the countries in Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, people are coming from, and such extreme horrors that have been forced on their governments largely by, as she mentioned, the IMF and the United States, going back to the creating banana republics in the 1950s. And we're all old enough to remember that here with retirees. But I'm thinking today is the day we're sitting here and they've announced this horrible package in Congress that would basically say, keep out, and if you're here, we're sending you back. Do you have, it's an awfully big topic, but any big asks that you could say to us that we should be fighting for right now against this?
Somebody said that I was contradictory, and I was, it's a morose book. I'm just trying to kind of analyze the situation of maybe there is an alternative. And at the end of the book, I potentially examine alternatives to the migration regime, globally speaking, where there isn't one, because everyone, no country, there's no international accord that actually exists and is put into place, even though everybody agreed on it, no one's actually practicing it. And I think, so I could be more general about, I would oppose, of course, the congressional package is going to contribute to a tremendous amount of suffering. It'll also hurt the U.S. economy, even though in the short run, many people think it's hurting the U.S. economy. It's not at all. But I argue that there is an absolute need to have a global decent work agenda, which is advocated by the International Labor Organization and many other institutions that view decent work as essential to migration in many other areas, especially amongst women. I have to say that women seem to be the most exploited of all the workers that I've investigated, and much of the research that I've done. It's women workers who are forced to be in people's households for 6 days a week. And when they get to go home, it's the household. So they continue to work and they educate the children and so forth. I can go further on this, but just to answer your question, I think I haven't really read that point, but I know that this is in the works, a congressional package that the Republicans are advocating. Is that part of the bill that will give money to, is that part of the compromise that Biden is making with with Congress? Ukraine. Well, Ukraine or Israel, yeah. I don't think money is going to Ukraine, but I could be wrong. But yeah, so my answer would be that we need a global decent work agenda that can be applied. Now, going back to Lorraine's point, you know, I am hopeful that can take place. One would hope that we can live in a world where everyone is engaged in decent work and people are cared for. But certainly oppose the greater restrictions that are placed on migration in this country.
Okay, I see 5 more hands. John Hyland, you're going to be the last question. Next is Michael Frank.
Yeah, I will unmute Michael in a second, but Bonnie or Diane, I'd have to step away for a second. Can one of you unmute people while I am gone? Okay, thank you.
Michael.
Manny, what exactly is imperialism? The term is used on the left, right? And it's assumed that people understand what that means or have a general sense of what that means. um, other outside the left is seen as an ideological weapon, right? And not really much more than that. So can you give a precise scientific definition of the concept of imperialism?
Yes, I can, but that will take another 3 hours or more. I'm working on a paper that examines first worldism, uh, rich countries and their relationship to poor countries. But because time is short and so forth, I would say that most academics do not believe in imperialism, although there's a resurgence of this concept in the last 5 years or something like that. But ever since 2000 and the publication of Empire by Hart and Negri, this book that sold probably tens of thousands of copies, if not hundreds of thousands of copies, people don't believe in imperialism anymore. There's an empire. There's no such thing as a working class or workers. We're all in it together, and we have to fight against the power, whoever that is. So I'm trying to identify, the variables that are related to imperialism. And of course, there are many different forms of imperialism. And they, I think they could be, expressed in many different ways too, through military might, through cultural examples, through political examples, and through economic examples. In this book, I do examine the case of political scientists who argue that what's so great about migration is that people will gain the democratic skills to go home and overthrow their governments. So I just wonder what kinds of skills people will learn democratically in the United Arab Emirates to go home and or knowledge to go home and educate to India, wherever, to overthrow their governments. That's actually the case. I can give you the citation if you'd like. So, if you want to have a discussion about imperialism, I would be very, very interested in doing so, because I do believe that it exists, and I think that it requires a lot of research. I've been working on an article for about 6 to 7 months at this point.
Walter Down.
Hi, Walter.
Hi. Thanks. Well, first, I want to agree with several speakers so far who have pointed to the irony of the immigration crisis on our own borders. The bitter irony is that most of the migrants who are most burdened by the crisis, especially those coming from Central America, are driven here and to leave their home countries by repressive governments and economies that don't offer them a way to make a living. And both the economies and policies of these countries are in effect imposed on them by the powerful, wealthy countries, which is, to get to the last question, the imperialist countries, in particular our own. So the crisis that appears to be arriving at our borders from outside, some politicians even call it an invasion, are actually enabled by the U.S. economic and political actions. We've created, or the rulers of this country have created the crisis that seems to be imposing itself on us, where it's really imposing on the poorer countries of the world. I think, Manny, by the way, you're making the definition of imperialism too complex. I mean, there are very difficult questions as to exactly which countries count as imperialism and which are sub-imperialism. You brought up that category as well. But isn't imperialism essentially just the domination of some countries by others, by the wealthier countries who dominate, exploit them militarily and economically? One could go into.
I use the term. I mean, that's at the center of this book: unequal exchange. The process in which I pointed out where the value exchange with respect to trade is completely dominated by the rich countries of the world in terms of the value that is received from the poor countries is from industrial production increasingly is the beneficiaries of it are the imperialist countries. So yeah, I do discuss it in this book, but I'm just trying to be diplomatic because I think there are people with perspectives that may not agree, may not align with this book.
Glenn Kissack. Thank you, Manny.
Yeah, I guess I had a question as to what those of us who are on the left can say about migration that isn't Donald Trump and that isn't Joe Biden, because their policies were fairly similar. Donald Trump is running actually for president on the basis that people from other countries are poisoning our blood. I mean, that's something that you hadn't heard since the 1930s when Hitler talked about Jews in that way. So a couple of things come to mind. One is that there are 11 million people who are undocumented here. Many of them work in the most difficult, low-paid, backbreaking jobs. And many of them feel that they can't complain, they can't form unions because they are vulnerable. And so it seems to me the one thing that we should support is legalization for all those people. That would be, I think, a great benefit. And the second thing I think we should support is a rational, policy of allowing, let's say, 3 million migrants in a year. That would be fewer than 1% of the country. It would, this is a country where our birth rate is just slightly higher than our death rate, so we actually need immigration. And we should have preference to those people who are coming from countries that the U.S. policy has done tremendous damage to. I mean, I remember in the 80s with Reagan and the El Salvadorian dictatorship, murdering nuns, murdering, activists. So given that, we should have a rational policy that says, yes, we're going to take in millions of people. We're going to give preference to people who are in desperate straits. And that would be a morally and politically defensible policy that the left could take. It certainly shouldn't be supporting the Biden compromise. I mean, we shouldn't be in that position.
Thanks for those comments. I fully agree. I think the election this year will turn on the question of migration, and falsely, because migrants actually help the United States, as you pointed out. And I really would like to talk to Michael Frank and Walter and others about the question of imperialism, and at some point, if there's the opportunity. So
Okay.
I agree. This election will turn on that, as well as many European and other countries on the question of migration.
Last two questions. Alice Filafani. We've got to unmute Alice.
Yes. Yes. I would like to ask about.
There's an echo, Alice. I can't hear you.
Okay.
I was gonna have to turn one of these.
Do you have two devices?
All right. Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, Alice, I'm going to go to John and then come back to you when you fix your sound issue. Okay, John Highland.
Okay, I'm muted now, right?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Manny, for such a good presentation on such a key topic. Are there, and what are they, any positive responses on the part of labor unions or the labor movement, nationally and or internationally, in response to the migration situation?
I think that's a brilliant question, John. I think the PSC is taking a good position in terms of citizenship and so forth. I think it may want to take a position on the migrants who are some 200. There were about 200,000 migrants that came through New York. I think there may be about 100,000 left. But these are our future students in some respects, their children and so forth. So I think it's beneficial from an economic perspective to CUNY and so forth. The problem with respect to migration, sadly, John, is that most countries around the world, especially their unions, are opposed to migration. And I think that's probably true it is true in the United States as well. So I think that's a false construct. However, there are international federations that exist that, as well as the International Labor Organization, which is supposed to be representative of labor as well as capital. It is actually doing the work of labor because there are very few labor unions around. But there are a number of federations that are educating workers about how to accept migrants as being integral to societies. I mean, if you go to countries of the global north, we're talking about 10 to 15% of the populations are legally engaged in work as migrants. Because they're essential workers, Glenn pointed out. They're essential they were essential under the COVID crisis, not just in the United States, but overseas in rich countries, and yet they're reviled as well by unions. But I think on an international basis, there is some kind of consensus that migrants are not taking jobs. In fact, they're advancing economies and making people more wealthy.
Alice, have you taken care of your sound thing issue?
One of the groups is called Industrial, which is I think maybe loosely affiliated with the International Trade Union Confederation. Anyway.
Thank you.
And Lorraine made a point about the AFL-CIO, which is it changed its position, but its constituent unions don't want migration. So many of them don't.
Thank you, Manny. Alice, have you? Well, I think that we should thank Manny for a very illustrious, educational, and brilliant presentation. And we're going to stop this part of the program because we're waiting to hear from our welfare fund people. I want to give Manny a round of applause and thank you from everybody for a wonderful presentation and discussion. It looks like Manny's open to individual conversations with some of you who have a lot more to think about and talk about. Peter, I'm sorry, I'm not going to call on you. We're going to go to the next part of the program, but you can engage with Manny. You want to give Manny, you maybe want to put your email in it. There it is. Manny put his email in the chat, manny.ness@gmail.com. And somebody earlier had asked about the title of Manny's book. I don't know if that was ever written in the chat. The title is Migration as Economic Imperialism, How International Labor Mobility Undermines
Poor countries.
Economic development in poor countries. And the publisher is Polity. So thank you again, Manny. We appreciate you speaking to us.
I'm sure I can learn a lot more from you than I can convey. So
I'm sure we could go on for a lengthy discussion. Thank you again.
All right, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, our pleasure. Our pleasure. Okay, we're going to finish up. We have 10 more minutes with Michael Foley from our welfare fund. He has a few things he can tell us, and you might have some questions for Michael. So hi, Michael. Thank you for coming.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Ann, very much. I'm glad to be here today. Again, my name is Mike Foley. I'm the Director of Communications for the PSC CUNY Welfare Fund. As I'm sure most of you know, we manage your supplemental benefits, your drug, dental, hearing, and vision care. I want to talk about two things real quickly today. I appreciate Ann making some time for this. It's been a big topic of conversation amongst all of you and our members just for the past several months. That's vaccines and Paxlovid. As we all know, and as Ann can, and many of us can attest to, COVID is still very much with us. There seems to have been a resurgence in COVID cases over the last several months. And many of our members are concerned about two things. How do I get vaccinated against COVID-19? And if I am unfortunate enough to contract COVID, how can I obtain Paxlovid? Let's talk about Paxlovid first. Paxlovid is the only FDA-approved drug for treatment of COVID. And as with many things around prescription drugs and healthcare, it can be extremely frustrating to know what steps to take care of yourself. Paxlovid, as many of our members have discovered, unfortunately, is not covered either through your medical coverage, GHI, senior care, or other city-provided medical coverage, or through the welfare fund's CVS SilverScript plan. That's due to a variety of different reasons that may change in the future, but that doesn't mean you have no place to go to obtain Paxlovid. The problem is this issue has not been communicated widely by a bunch of different entities, the federal government, the city of New York, your health provider. We're doing the best we can at the Welfare Fund to get the word out. If you received our recent fall benefits bulletin, you saw a lot of this discussed in our benefit bulletin. It's front and center on our webpage as well. Paxlovid is available to you at basically no cost. I can't 100% guarantee it, but it's available to you at no cost through a partnership between the federal government and the drug manufacturer Pfizer. They have made available a program called Paxess. Paxess allows you to essentially download a Pfizer drug card that you can take to your pharmacy along with your prescription for Paxlovid, and you will get the drug at no cost. There may be some pharmacies and that do charge a copay. They may have their own copay policies that we have no control over, but I've spoken to many, many members that have gone to CVS, Walgreens, some of your retailing pharmacies like Walmart and Costco, and have been able to obtain Paxlovid with no copay whatsoever. So the steps to take, and I will put this in the chat, is contact me or go to our website and I will get you a link to the Paxess program. It's an online registration process, or you can call them. I have found, talking to our members, that calling a Pfizer representative can in and of itself be difficult. The easiest way to go about this process, I've done it myself a couple different times as test runs, and I've spoken to many members that have done this and have had no problems at all, and that's to register via the website. They'll ask you a few questions. It takes about 5 minutes. There might be some confusion over, like, it might say like your doctor isn't recognized or something. Just keep hitting the right, just keep progressing through the checklist. And at the end of that process, you will get on your computer screen, you'll get a card that you can download, or you can take a picture of it with your phone, or even manually write down the registration number and the account number and whatnot. Take that information to your pharmacist along with the prescription for Paxlovid. You need that prescription. What the federal government is concerned about is people obtaining Paxlovid and stockpiling it when they don't need it. In other words, when they don't have a diagnosis of COVID. So you need that prescription from your doctor, and you need that card. Go down to your pharmacy, and you shouldn't have any problem at all. Many of our members have been fortunate enough to go to a pharmacy or a doctor's office that has existing stock of Paxlovid. The federal government issued large amounts of the drug to some pharmacies and doctor's offices and told these folks, hey, listen, if someone comes in with a prescription, just give it out. First come, first serve. And some of our members have been pleasantly surprised by that. They've gone to the pharmacy or they've gone to their doctor's office, and the doctor said, here's a prescription and here's some of it to take right now. So if that happens to you, fantastic. But if you do have to take the step of obtaining the PACSS card, it's not difficult, and it's a quick way to obtain the only drug that the federal government at least recognizes as a good treatment for Paxlovid. I would urge everyone to listen to your doctor first. Paxlovid may not be the best choice for you. Discuss things with your doctor, reach a consensus with your doctor, and then trust your pharmacist to follow through with providing the Paxlovid for you. Any questions about Paxlovid before I just move on to a general discussion about vaccines? Francis, you can unmute.
Francis and John, your questions about Paxlovid?
No, I don't have a question about Paxlovid. I think he's going to go on to other immunizations of MMR and tetanus.
Yes. All right, let's dive right into the vaccine question. Again, as we all know, navigating the healthcare system, navigating prescription drug plans is very difficult. It can be maddening at times. At the Welfare Fund, we try to do our best to simplify it. One of the things we did is create the chart that you can see on your screen right now. So obtaining vaccines for COVID, flu, pneumonia, RSV is a very popular topic right now, along with things like shingles and Tdap. So if you are a retiree under the age of 65, you're going to obtain all of those vaccines utilizing your basic health care plan, your medical coverage, not your CVS card. You're going to be utilizing your basic health care card, more than likely GHI, senior care, or something along those lines. What happens a lot with our members is they show up at the pharmacy looking for the vaccine. They present their CVS SilverScript card and they're denied. I wish our CVS friends would be a little better at the counter explaining to people that, hey, by the way, you might have better luck utilizing your basic healthcare coverage card, such as GHI. Now, let's talk about retirees over the age of 65. For COVID, flu, and pneumonia, it's your Medicare card. So when you go to the pharmacy, make sure you bring your Medicare card to show to your pharmacist. That should provide you free access to the COVID-19 vaccine, the flu vaccine, and the pneumonia vaccine. For RSV, which is a very important vaccine right now, that is your CVS SilverScript card. For shingles, it's your SilverScript card. For Tdap, it is your SilverScript card. Most other vaccines are also under the SilverScript card, which is essentially a collaboration between us and Medicare. So keep in mind, for retirees under 65, it's your GHI card, more than likely. For retirees,
I'm sorry.
Did I hear someone?
What is Tdap?
What's Tdap? I don't take it, obviously. Anyone else have any information about Tdap that can help us?
I can find out.
It's tetanus, diphtheria.
Oh, there we go. That's right.
I forgot the A is, and P is pertussis.
Yeah. Okay. And by the way, let's all hope none of us ever need these things, but unfortunately we will. So, but in any case, so retirees over 65, make sure you have that Medicare card handy, along with your CVS SilverScript card when you go to the pharmacist. That way, if the pharmacist tells you, oh no, it's not this card, you can hit them with the next card and say, what about my Medicare card? That kind of thing. So you can make this work out for you. You can protect yourself as long as you have the best information. At the Welfare Fund, we've tried to garner, sort of round up that best information and make it easily accessible. Questions about vaccines and or Paxlovid? John. Got to unmute there, John. There we go.
Okay, thanks. Can one register for the Pfizer drug card now in anticipation?
Yes.
Or
yep.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, John, for mentioning that. this PACSS program is good for the remainder of 2024. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you're unfortunate enough to contract COVID and you need Paxlovid, you can utilize the PACSS program right until the end of this year. So you have almost a full year to utilize this benefit.
Thank you.
Jack Hammond.
Yeah, just I understood John's question to be different, which was that can you register ahead of time without having?
Oh, absolutely. And John, forgive me. You're right. Your question triggered a different thought. But thank you, Jack, for picking up on that.
And I have another question too, but go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I would advise everyone to go ahead and register and obtain the card now as a hedge against needing it in a rush if you do happen to catch COVID. So you can get the card now. That card information is good for the rest of the year. You don't need a prescription, in other words, to download the card. So everyone, download the card, keep the information handy. God forbid, if you do get it, you'll be a little ahead of the game. All you'll need is the prescription at that point. Let's your second question.
Yeah, my second question is, I know two people who not in the PSC, and I don't know what other coverage they may have, but who called the city COVID hotline and got Paxlovid, as far as I understood, without having a prescription.
Without a prescription.
That was, I may be wrong about
that.
But that's,
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there's so many different situations that impact how drugs are prescribed and delivered. I will say this, that the federal government has been purchasing immense amounts of Paxlovid and have probably been giving it out to a variety of different organizations, including probably the city of New York, and saying things like, listen, if someone comes in and they need it, just give it to them. So I have spoken to many members that have been pleasantly surprised by the ease of obtaining it. I haven't spoken to anyone yet who hasn't had a prescription. So I would not rule that out. I can't say if that's true or not. But it wouldn't surprise me, put it that way.
Stephanie McGregor.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Some of us cannot take Paxlovid because of its interaction with, blood thinners and other things.
Of
course. Do the same problems or procedures apply if you to get those alternatives?
Well, in a situation like that, I would ask you to defer to your physician. Talk to your physician, ask them what other alternatives you have to Paxlovid. Like I had mentioned, Paxlovid is the only FDA-approved drug out there right now used to treat COVID. There may be some other remedies that your physician is aware of, but if you are unable to take Paxlovid, please have a good discussion with your physician and take their advice.
Okay. Sylvia Scheinlin.
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, I didn't catch if you said before whether or not those of us under 65 would also need the PACSS card.
Yes. Yeah, the PACSS card is good for anyone, really. Active employees, adjuncts, retirees under 65, retirees over 65.
So no one, even active people, are covered under the regular insurance right now.
Active employees have access to this Pfizer program. Yes. So in other words, the federal government and Pfizer are basically just trying to unload Paxlovid as fast as they can. So take advantage of that policy right now because it only lasts for this year.
Okay. Thanks.
Dave Gottlieb.
Hey, David.
Hi there, Mike. I was not aware of the different kinds of cards you need for vaccines in particular.
Yes.
And that's very important. Now, I know you sent out information. I was not aware of it and I hadn't received anything yet.
Well, I'm glad we're talking
then.
then.
Could you send, I'm on the newsletter
Yes.
board. So could you send either Diane Mena or myself that information of what cards we need for the different vaccines? And we'll either put it in the next newsletter, or it may be that our executive committee of the retirees chapter may want to send out a special blast on that. I think it's quite important and different from the way we had to deal with vaccines in the past, which was show our Medicare card and that was that.
Yeah, great idea, David. Absolutely. I say shout it from the mountaintops. So
Okay, thank you.
I'll get you everything you need. Yep.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. Christy Folsom?
Christy, got to unmute there.
Thought you unmuted me. Okay. My
Hi,
question
Christy.
is about the link to the Pfizer or the Paxos, and how do you
Yes.
spell Paxos?
Yeah, I'm gonna put a link to the Welfare Fund's website and my email. Shoot me an email, Christy. I'll send you the link that you can click on directly.
So what's your email? Or you're sending.
I'll put it in the chat right
Thank
now.
you.
Yep.
Great.
In fact, I'm going to stop sharing this chart. Does anyone else need this chart for the time being while we just wrap up the last few questions? Well, I'll leave it up. Hold on.
All right. So we're gonna get Michael's email. All right. Francis Tom.
Hi there, Mike. I don't mean to change the subject, but perhaps
No
you
problem.
can help me with information. I'm still having trouble with my IRMA. I have not received it for 2022. And
Yeah.
I have sent letters. I had sent registered letters to the office at 22 Cortlandt, and I don't get any response. Is there
Big frustration. Yeah, big frustration. I'm hearing from a lot of our IRMA folks that that's exactly what they're going through. You're not alone. I was told that the IRMA checks were late, and I was told that they would be going out mid-December. Obviously, that has come and gone. So we have no direct role in either pressuring the city of New York to make good on their benefit. I would say this: stay in touch with the city and Office of Labor Relations. The last time I talked to OLR was about a month ago. I will say this: I will reach out to our contacts again at OLR and try and get some sort of explanation about what the heck is going on, because it is not a small amount of money.
No. Thank you.
Francis, write to us at Retirees.
I did. I have written to everyone.
And you've heard from Debbie Bell, and Debbie Bell put you on her list?
No, that she said that wait till mid-January. Mid-January has come and gone, and I've been waiting patiently.
Well, write again, and I'm going to send it off to her, because she's been keeping track of all of these and trying to do interference.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask Mike, can you put the link to the Paxos
Yeah, I don't have the page up at the moment. It would take a little while. So all I would ask everyone to do is just email me directly. I just put my email in the chat. I'm communications@psccuny.wf.org. Email me and I'll send you a bunch of information, including a link.
Again,
maybe that can all go in the next retiree email blast too.
Yep.
Communication. Okay, Lizette Cologne and then Lenore Beakey.
Yes, hello, Mike.
Hi, Lizette.
Maybe it will be good also, as David was saying, in terms of information in the newsletter. Could you kindly share also what vaccines are covered when you travel internationally? Recently, I went and there are two of them that are not being covered by SilverScript. I have been dealing with that since October. And I wonder if you have a list, then we can just go back to SilverScript. I mean, we're talking about a lot of money, and a lot of retirees keep traveling. So could you kindly think about
That's a good
that?
point, Lizette. Yeah, that's an excellent idea. I'll do a little research on that. I would say you can reach out directly to SilverScript and see if they have sort of a what you'd call a formulary of drug or vaccines, perhaps, that are available for overseas. I'd have to do a little research on that. But excellent point.
Thank you.
Mike, somebody asked in the chat, what is the SilverScript card?
So as a retiree over 65, you would have transitioned from CVS Caremark to CVS SilverScripts. CVS SilverScripts is your drug benefit in retirement through both Medicare and through the welfare fund. It's kind of a hybrid plan. Your card should say SilverScript on it, unless some of you may have purchased your own drug plan in retirement, either through private insurance or something along those lines. I mentioned SilverScripts only because the vast majority of our retiree members utilize that benefit. That's your no-cost benefit in retirement.
Thank you. Lenore, I think you'll be the last question.
Eleanor.
Hi, I don't see myself anywhere, but you can.
We can see you.
You can hear me. Okay, I sent to the welfare fund. It was only a couple of days ago, and I hadn't heard about Davis Visions. I don't think I've ever seen a store that actually says it sells Davis Vision. So, so how do I find out where they are, if they are in Manhattan?
Of course, Lenore. Davis, you're right. Davis Vision doesn't have a brick and mortar location, so to speak. They are a vision provider. So it's an 800 phone number. The first step is to call Davis Vision. And if you bear with me here. I'm sorry, Lenore, I won't be able to actually. Hold on. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Yeah. Lenore, email me and I'll send you all the information about Davis Vision. It's an 800 number. Tell them where you live and they'll tell you where the closest office to you is. Davis Vision they have participating offices throughout the boroughs, throughout the tri-state area. They're really easy to get a hold of, and they're really easy to find one that's right near you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you very much for all of this information.
That's my pleasure. Yeah, just
hesitate.
check out, email me with any other questions or whatnot. And Ann, thank you for the time.
My pleasure. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to Manny. Thank you to Dean. Thank you to Michael. A very quick preview of next month's meeting, a very exciting meeting is being organized by our own Joan Greenbaum on artificial intelligence. It's called Breaking Through the Hype, AI, Big Tech, and the Path Ahead. And we have two very renowned speakers, Meredith Whitaker, who is the president of Signal Foundation, and Sarah Myers-West, who's the managing director of the AI Now Institute. So I hope you'll join us. And thank you all for a very good meeting. Thank you, Dave, for taking notes. Thank you, Diane. And thank you, Ava. And thank you, Bonnie, for helping monitor and run the program. Thank you, everyone. And stay healthy. It is not a good thing to get sick. And personally, my doctor did not recommend Paxlovid for me. I think there's a bit of a controversy around it. But the best thing is to do what your doctor tells you. And the best thing is not to get sick at all. Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Have a happy and a healthy rest of the day. This meeting is adjourned.